Welcome back to another wonderful day of Islamic history, and we are going to be speaking about the so-called first civil war of the Muslim community, the fitna. And this occurred relatively soon, about 30 years after the death of the Prophet Muhammad, 25 to 30. Now, let's just back up and remember what was going on after the death of the Prophet Muhammad. What happened to leadership? And initially there was a consensus pick, Abu Bakr, but even back then there was some contention about who should actually succeed the Prophet. Of course, he didn't succeed in terms of prophecy, he didn't succeed in terms of sort of religious importance, but who was supposed to lead the community? Should the community remain together as a whole or not? And there was essentially discussion whether it should go to his son-in-law, Ali, who married his only daughter, Fatima, and also I think his cousin, or should it go to a very close member of the community, one of Prophet Muhammad's first followers, Abu Bakr, ended up being chosen kind of through a consensus process. Abu Bakr, who only, as you can see here, only lived for a few years when he died. And then the figure that was chosen is Umar. As you can see, it lasted about 10 years, but then he was murdered by a slave under slightly suspicious circumstances. Not clear what exactly happened. He was followed by Uthman, who lasted about 12 years, but interestingly, murdered by disgruntled troops. And now we're going to be speaking about Ali, the son-in-law, the figure with the closest, probably, connection to the Prophet Muhammad, at least in terms of direct lineage. But it was finally his turn. He was elected kind of leader, chosen to be leader amongst the Muslim community. Now, all of these people have very close connections to Prophet Muhammad. Many were early followers, or, as pointed out by Ali, directly in his family. In fact, all of them were connected to the Prophet Muhammad in some way by marriage, at the very least. And I just want to point out that these four figures, Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, and Ali, are sometimes referred to as the Rashidun, the first kind of rightly guided leaders. But that's in today's vision, or it's a term that came about 100, 200 years later. But at this point, they're not called the Rashidun, they're just kind of called the leaders, and they take the title again of Amir al-Mu'minin, that is the commander of the faithful, commander of the believers. And again, the key word here is believers at this initial moment. There is often an election process that allows these people to be picked, but they're all part of the Quraysh tribe. And this attachment to the tribe of the Prophet Muhammad, is seen as kind of a basic requirement of leadership of the Muslim or believer community at this time. And they're kind of picked by elders of the Muslim community in its different pieces. But what I want to jump to is the figure of Uthman, who comes in and is ultimately murdered. So he lasts for about 12 years, and he actually oversees a sizable expansion of the Muslim community. Not the Muslim community, but really the lands under Muslim control, right? So these conquests of places like Egypt and Kufa, Iraq, which had already started under Abu Bakr and Omar. Now there's been troops there for about 10 to 20 years, and there's already kind of a bit of tension as to how are the spoils of war going to be distributed. What about not just the booty, the stuff you seize in the raids and the conquest, and the slaves, but what happens to the land? Right? Who controls the land, and who's going to profit from that? How much of it is supposed to go to the troops? Would it be distributed equally? How much is it going to go to the leaders, to the state? What's clear is that people who had obviously connections, people who were part of the Quraysh tribe and their leaders, received very large estates. Often they had some slave labor to run those estates, such as the recalcitrant Arabian tribes that refused or kind of broke off from the Muslim community during the Ridda Wars. And it's clear that Uthman, to kind of consolidate his reign, his rule, and to find people who were willing to serve him loyally, turned to the Quraysh and to his relatives to staff key positions. Okay, So this already sets up a tension, right? Should Uthman figure the most pious, the best Muslims, the best group of people who are part of this new believer community and who most clearly inhibit this new religiosity, or should they go with the people who are most closely connected, the best commanders, etc.? And it's clear already that some of his choices raised the hackles of members of the believer community. So if we look at Walid ibn Uqba, a relative, he's basically kicked out of his position because he was drunk all the time. But in the end, he's not punished, even though being drunk is not allowed in this new religion. At the same time, Muawiyah, a close relative of Uthman, the son of Abu Sufyan, the former enemy of the Prophet Muhammad, but who converted upon the conquest of Mecca, he's given a plum position as governor of Syria, which is probably the most important province at that time. And then he also takes away a very important commander, this figure, Amr ibn al-As, and he puts in his foster brother in his place, right? So he's constantly kind of shifting the ranks, putting in people who are more loyal or closer to him into leadership positions. But beyond this, there's also transformations of the actual religion itself. Now, this doesn't take the form of him decreeing what is right or wrong in any way. Again, the prophecy had ended with the Prophet Muhammad. In fact, the idea is that the Prophet Muhammad is kind of the seal of the prophets. But there are other things that Uthman involved himself in that created some tensions. And one of these is the idea that the Quran itself as a text was sort of codified at this moment. Now, it's not really clear if this really happened or not, but Uthman is credited with the kind of codification of this. And codification literally in the idea of having a codex, right? So the Quran went from an oral text, something that was recited and that people remembered and took to heart, and then told to other people, to a text that was going to be written down. And what was happening is that now, a few decades after the death of the Prophet Muhammad, there turned out to be sort of variations. Different people had heard different things. There's slight differences in some retellings, and people were, maybe had written them down as notes, but there wasn't a sort of definitive idea of the Quran as one text, even though it should have, right? Because it's the word of God. It only has one version. And so he basically apparently had the Quran compiled, and he kind of established an official version, and he sent this out to the Amsar, to the garrison towns with the soldiers where the Arab/Muslim troops were there. And he pushed out these kind of regional versions, but some people refused to agree. Some people had their own copy and just did not allow this copy to be destroyed. Now, of course, we don't know what happened. I mean, that copy doesn't exist anymore. All the copies we have of the Quran today are basically definitive versions of it, except maybe one that was found in a mosque in Yemen. But for the most part, we have this idea that now all of a sudden he is codifying the Quran and the Word of God, and therefore eliminating people's personal version of the Quran, or the local version of the Quran. Interestingly, there's a few kind of monumental Qurans written on parchment paper that have been attributed to the Quran that Uthman had compiled, the kind of official Quran. These actually, if you look at them codicologically, that is, if you look at the paper and the binding and all this stuff, it's clear they're not from the time of Uthman. They're about from the 900s, so a few centuries afterwards. But they seem massive. They're written in this old script, what's called Kufic script. They seem without dots often, and it seems like they are antique objects, and so a sort of legend has arisen from them. One of them you can still see today in Tashkent. There's a few others in different places. An interesting story is that Uthman, when he was murdered, was actually apparently reading the Quran, and so one of the signs of let's say accuracy or verity of this copy is that it has a giant blood stain in the middle, right, where he got stabbed, and then he slumps over the Quran and bleeds onto it. So the idea here is that there is some sort of original Quran that's attached to the figure of Uthman. But at the end of the day, it's really a question of who's directing the piety and rituals of the community. Is it going to be the community itself? And what is the role of this leader, of the successor, of the Amir al-Mu'minin in this process? Long story short, these tensions came to a boil, and Uthman was actually murdered by his troops. Troops that marched from Fustat, which is basically Cairo, Egypt, and Kufa, which is today in Iraq, the two major garrison cities, and Basra as well. 1656, had a dispute over pay, dispute over things. They marched on to Medina. They kind of laid it a bit in siege. And then eventually these tensions came to a boil, and they came in and they murdered him. A fight arose, he got murdered. But the question is that no one came to aid, right? He didn't have troops there. No one basically was able to stop these troops, and no one was willing to step in and support him. Neither the Quraysh tribe, but also the youngest and still living widow, former wife of the Prophet Muhammad, Aisha, who was an immensely powerful figure. She also didn't step in and stop any of this. And so this created a situation called the first fitna, or civil war. Uthman died, but his death was kind of suspicious. Like, the person taking over now has to punish the murderers. But often the murderers, these troops, actually supported the next leader, that is Ali. Okay, so this set up a tension, right, between people who thought that Ali was the legitimate leader because he was ultimately elected, or a figure named Muawiyah, a relation of Uthman, who basically said, no, this election is invalid. The murderer is put in the place of the people that he wanted, and that he is going to now start a campaign, a military campaign to oust Ali. Okay, so it starts off the first fitna. Fitna means strife, sedition. It can mean a variety of different things, but in this case, we can maybe translate it as civil war. And this created basically it broke apart the Muslim community. On one hand, you have the Quraysh itself, who refused to support Ali. They left Mecca. They left Medina for Mecca. They called for vengeance for Uthman. On the other hand, the Medinis themselves, basically the people who were from Medina, the Ansar, heavily supported Ali, as well as the different parties, people from Kufa and these troops, and these people became known as Shi'at Ali, okay, supporters of Ali, the party of Ali, and this would ultimately become known. This is the very, very early stages of what becomes known as the Shia, which is one of the main theological divisions in Islam today. And it all starts off with this question of who is actually supposed to lead, and what is the nature of leadership, and ultimately what are the power of succession. But at this point, it's really just about supporting Ali or Muawiyah. And these battles, basically, there's a number of battles I'm not going to get into here, but they rage over here, starting off the Battle of the Camel, and then eventually in Siffin, and then later on in the Second Civil War in Karbala and elsewhere. But what we're looking at here is battles occurring essentially across Iraq and Syria, which are again the major sites of the armies at this point. And the more important one, the moment it all comes to head, Ali actually wins in the so-called Battle of the Camel, because one of the figures, Aisha, the former wife of the Prophet Muhammad, who is now battling against Ali, she's directing the battle from on top of a litter, on top of a camel, and there's a lot of fierce fighting around that. And basically, this is the moment when the supporters and opponents of Ali meet. Ultimately, Ali wins, right? So Aisha loses. She's exiled to Medina. Two companions of the Prophet Muhammad die, right? So at this point, basically, Muslims are killing each other. The final companions of the Prophet Muhammad are dying. Ali puts the kind of the Medani's Ansar helpers, the people that supported the community early on, into governor positions. And now he's going to do the final strike against Muawiyah, the governor of Syria, the relative of Uthman, who's actually started this military campaign. And he goes out to basically towards Syria in the Battle of Siffin. And Siffin is where Ali and Muawiyah meet. Now, Muawiyah, I think, knows that he's going to lose. He's in a losing position. And he realizes that if he can buy himself more time, he can probably create more dissension, find more supporters. Ultimately, what he ends up doing is, he, instead of starting a battle, he asks for arbitration. He says, Muslims shouldn't fight each other, brothers shouldn't fight each other. And he says that this is a legal matter, a matter for theology. We should leave this to the experts. And so what's said is that his soldiers would take leaves of the Quran and put them on their lances as a sort of symbolic expression of that idea. People pushed Ali not to take this moment to actually go into battle and settle it. But Ali actually takes that moment, decides to go into arbitration, and this ends up being actually a failure for him, because the arbitration is kind of it doesn't come up, it takes a long time, it doesn't come up with a clear decision. And in that meantime, there's people that believe that he actually, had God was on his side, that he was in the right, and that he had failed to let kind of God judge his victory by battle, right? So if God was really on his side, they should fight, and then we'll see who is supposed to where God's judgment lay, that is with a victor. And therefore, by agreeing to this arbitration, he actually was going against God's will in a sense. And so a group of kind of ultra pious believers, people who, you can think of the believer movement but taken to an extreme of piety, who thought that other people who weren't following the exact rules of the believer movement were outside of it, began to form. This group is called the Kharajites, Khariji in singular, Khawarij in plural. And Kharaja, the word is derived from, means to go out, to exit. And really, they exited the community. They said that these figured that Ali had failed the community. And ultimately, what they ended up doing is actually assassinating him. A follower of the Khawarij, comes up after, I believe, the communal prayer, and he stabs and kills Ali. Ali dies. Muawiyah, who had managed to extend the thing, now is left unopposed, and this is essentially the end of the first civil war, but it's just the beginning of a set of civil wars.